All right, so simple to-do page. Like I said, everyone has to make your own to-do application at some time or another. It's like a rite of passage. And this one only gives us kind of some bare bones steps, which we need to create our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, display a list of items that we need to do, and use local storage to get, remove, and add them. We need to create a form at the bottom of the list to add more things. We need to create the ability to check off things from our to-do list. When we check things off, we need to make sure that it has a strike through so we know that it's already done. This will probably alter the data structure that we have in local storage. And at the end, we can style it, possibly using Bootstrap or just or vanilla CSS or both. So we can start by doing like it says and creating our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And make touch index.html, touch styles.css, and touch script.js. Do that. Let's call this simple to do. And I'll link this up with my CSS file and with my JavaScript file. Okay. So there's many ways we can tackle this. Before I worry about how to, retrieve things and get things from my to-do list, I want to come up with at least a basic HTML skeleton of where things will go. So first, I'm going to have an area for my list. So I'm going to have a div here, and I'll call this div, we can give this div an ID of list container. And what's a good HTML tag to store a list of items?
UL.
Yeah, an unordered list. And I'll give this one an ID, and we can call it to-do list. And below that, I'm going to put a second div. I like wrapping things in div personally. I'm going to call this one form container. And then I'm going to define a form. Give this one an ID of new form. We can give it one input, type equals task, and a button, type equals submit. We can say submit here. And I'll also say, new to do text, not task. There we go. So now if I open this, I've got my new to do here. There's no to-dos to put there, so it's not displaying them yet. But if I inspect it, I should still see that there's an unordered list there nonetheless. So there's an unordered list. It's got nothing in it, so it doesn't take up any space, but it does exist. I'm not going to worry about how it looks yet. For now, I just want to get it working, and then I'll worry about making it look good. So any questions about how I formatted my HTML before we get into the JavaScript? Okay. So think about JavaScript. What are the tasks that we need to accomplish in order to make this work? Breaking them down into smaller pieces as possible.
Add a new to do.
Yeah. So we need to be able to add a new to do to the list when we submit the form. We need to be able to retrieve the list and render it to the screen on load, on page load. We need to be able to cross off a task by clicking it. Is there anything else any larger tasks that we need to think about?
Save tasks to local storage and be able to get them out of local storage.
Yeah, form and save to local storage and retrieve the list from local storage and render it to the screen like that, and save whether it's done in local storage. Okay, so I think what I would like to do is I'd like to start out by thinking, okay, how do I want my tasks to be saved in local storage? Because the thing about local storage can only save one type of data, right? And what is that?
String.
Yeah, it can only save strings. So we have a fairly hefty limitation to get over. So we know we're going to have to take however we save these, we're going to need to be able to convert them into a string. But what would be a good data structure to hold on to a list of tasks?
I use an array and JSON stringify.
Yeah, so we can have an array of tasks and use JSON to stringify them when we want to put them into local storage. So let's talk about our list. So our list should be an array. What should it be an array of?
Things to do.
Yeah, an array of to-dos. And should those to-dos just be strings, or should they be something else?
Strings.
Okay, they can be strings. Okay. And so we know that when we add a new to-do to the list and save a local storage, it'll look something like this. So add new task as string to-do list to list, save list to local storage with json.stringify. Okay, so let's get this first task done first. So we need to add a new to-do to the list and we submit the form, which means we need to have an event listener on this form. So our form is called new form. So we can save that to a variable. So const new form equals document.getElementById new form. Is that how I saved it, or did I use a dash there? Use a dash. And we can write a function that will do that. And we can add it as an event listener to new form. So we could say new form dot add event listener. It's going to be on a submit. And we can either write an anonymous function here or write another function and put it in there. Let's write an anonymous function for now. So I'm going to say event, like so. We need to make sure that we event.prevent default before anything else, so we don't refresh the page. And just to make sure it's working, I'm going to console.log event right here, just to make sure that when we click on it, we should be able, when we submit the form, something should happen. Here's our submit event. Okay, so we have a function that runs when we submit the form. So we need to add a new task to the string as a list, save list to local storage from json.stringify. All right, so how do we get our task out of our form?
new form dot value.
So we can just, if we console.log, whoop, .log, oh, okay, that was weird. Log new form dot value. Let's see if we see what's typed in here. So learn Python, hit submit. Okay, so new form doesn't get us the value, but we should be able to get from new form to our input, right? We need to do some DOM traversal to do that. So one thing I could do is I could say, if I console.log new form.elements, it gives me an HTML form controls collection, which includes an input and a button. So from that input, it's got a lot of stuff here, but I should be able to get to the value. So if I console.log new forms elements 0.value, let's see if that will let me get learn Python. There we go. So I could say, all right, let new task equal new form elements 0.value. So we've got our new task. We need to add it to the list. We don't have a list yet, though, right? So we're going to need to make sure that we have a list that we can add it to. So we could say const list equals an empty array, list.push new task. And we need to save the list to local storage with json.stringify. So we could say local storage dot add item, or is it dot set item? There we go. You can call it to-dos. And inside we're going to put json.stringify list. So to test this out, I'm going to first clear local storage out in case I've got something in there. Now if I hit learn Python, hit submit, and then check local storage, I've got in here to-dos, and inside that to-dos we've got a stringified array, and inside of that array we've got learn Python. All right, what questions do you have about what we've done so far?
Is it better to use elements and index rather than just giving both of them a unique ID?
I wouldn't say it's better or worse. Yeah, there's nothing stopping us from giving this input its own ID, and that would be easier. The reason I kind of default to using new form.elements is it saves me time by not having to give everything its own ID. And by using event, using event here or new form, if I wanted to add this function to other forms, it would make it easier to do so because it wouldn't be tied to a unique ID.
Thank you.
No problem. So it kind of comes down to situation in many cases. All right, so is there anything else this function should be doing? Because right now it prevents the default task, gets the task out of the form, adds it to our list, and saves the list to our to-dos. Should it be doing something about this, maybe? Because right now I submitted the form, but this is still there. Do we want that to still be there?
You could do input.reset to just clear it.
Yeah, so we could do, in this case it would be new form.elements 0.reset. Let's try that. So if I do now learn JavaScript and hit submit.
I think you need the parentheses at the end.
Yeah. Learn HTML. Uh-oh. Reset is not a function. So let's look that up real quick. So JavaScript input reset. So it says it restores a form element's default values. Oh, so it looks like we can call this on the form rather than the input. So I just do new form.reset. Maybe that'll work. Okay. And if I check local storage, okay, I've got a problem. What's happened here? Why does it only have learn CSS in it?
I think the empty array is getting reset, is it?
Yep. So this array right here, every time we reload the page, is getting reset to an empty array. So we need to make sure that when we load the page, this list gets populated with all of the tasks that exist, if there are any. So this is a good time for us to retrieve the list from local storage and render it to the screen on page load. So we could call this one load list. All right, so retrieve list from local storage and render it to the screen on page load. Let's break that down a little bit. So retrieve the list from local storage, what does that mean? How can we do that?
Use the array as an input to create new list items, and also set the array equal to the array inside of the storage.
Yes, we want to set list equal to local storage dot get item to dos. And we want to turn that from a string into an array, right? So that would be with JSON.parse, which turns a string into a data structure if it can be translated like that. And does this method need to do anything else? What happens if there isn't something called to-dos in local storage?
Oh, right. You need an if statement or it'll give you an error and just stop the code.
Yeah. So if local storage has our to-dos, do this. Else we want it to be, else set the list to an empty array. So we could do something like if local storage dot get item to-dos list equals, and actually I could set the list directly to that. There's nothing stopping me, but I decided I want this to be what's called more of a pure function, meaning I want it to only load the list and return it without affecting anything that's directly affecting anything outside of that. It's nothing, it would still work just as well, but this would allow low list to do more than just populate this list. We could do more things with it if we have to. So I could just say return local storage.get item to-dos JSON.parse that. And down here, I'll just say return an empty array. So instead of, so when I do that, I'm going to set list equal to load list, like so. And now load list, instead of only populating a single array, can populate any other array I want to if I need to. So pure functions like this, meaning they don't have any side effects out of just returning something, are kind of more extensible because now it can fit with any other parts. I don't know if I'll need it to yet, but it's good to have that working part available that can just shoot out the list whenever I need it. Does that make sense?
Noah, can you show what you set equal to what again up at the top?
Yeah. So I set list, this variable, equal to the return value of load list, which is either our list of to-dos or an empty array.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. So now if I refresh the page, cannot access load list before initialization. Whoops. So we can move this, put it right there. So now if I say learn Python, hit submit, if I check local storage, I've now got 2 tasks, learn CSS and learn Python. And if I look at the list variable, here it is in array form. So now what I have is I have 1 copy of the data, essentially, like this is kind of like a model of front end and back end development almost, because I've got 1 copy of the data on my front end, which is just this local variable, and 1 copy of the data in my back end, which is just local storage. So my task is going to be making sure that these 2 copies of the same data are always the same, because I don't want any discrepancies between what's in the front and what's in the back. But now we have something that allows us to update our list. So I do learn JavaScript, hit submit. And if I check list again, there's list, and local storage looks the same. All right. What questions do you have about how we've been saving things to local storage? Okay. So we can save new tasks, but we still need to actually display them on the screen, right? So retrieve the local storage and render it to the screen on page load. So we may want to write another function. We can call this function render tasks, or render list, perhaps, to be consistent. And we want this to render, so we need to make sure that each of our tasks get put on the page, right? So what's our first step? Knowing we have a list of to-do tasks.
Might want to loop through the list to get each item.
Yep. So iterate through list of to-dos. And what do we want to do for each iteration?
Create a list item element and append that to your list.
Create an li element and append it to the ul. Is there anything we need to do to each li before we append it to the ul? Because we want these LIs to be the things that display those tasks, right? Maybe we want to say set inner text to each to do, and then append it to the UL. So first we need to grab our to-do list from our DOM, which has the ID of to-do list. So let ul equal document.getElementById ID to-do list. And then we can start iterating. We can say for let I equal 0, I is less than list.length, I++. So then we need to create an li. And say let li equal document.create element. That's an li. You can say li.innerText equals list I. Then we would say ul.append child li. All right, does this solution make sense? When should we call on this function?
Right after you load the
Yeah.
local store.
Yeah, so we can do render list right here. So if this is working, we should see a list. We should see learn CSS, learn Python, learn JavaScript above our form. Refresh the page. Hey, there they are. That's good. And if we do learn HTML here, all right, it's not showing up, but if I refresh the page, there it is. So why isn't it showing up until I refresh the page?
Because it's only rendering it once when you first load the page.
Yep. So we can just call on our function again when we create a new form. So just say render list all over again every time we do that. Let's try it. So learn C++. Whoa, okay, that's not what I wanted. Does anyone have any idea what happened here?
It's loading your whole list again.
Yeah.
You need to just load just add the one element rather than the whole.
Yeah, so we need to just add the one element because it's just putting this function, render list, appends the entire list to there. So we could write a separate function that just only appends one, or we could make sure that the list gets replaced entirely with a new list every time. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to say, before I start iterating, I'm going to set ul.innerHTML equal to an empty string. So that's going to get rid of all of the list items inside the UL before it replaces them with a new list. So now if I do refresh the page, you learn Java, hit submit. Even though it looks like it's just appending one thing, it's actually replacing the entire list with the new updated list. And in general, this is a good pattern to follow when you're working with front-end development. Most pages you visit that use a framework with JavaScript are actually re-rendering all of their content all of the time every time you interact with it. It's just doing it so quickly you never see it. All right. Any questions about what we've done so far? All right, so now we have what I think is probably the most difficult part. We need to be able to cross off each of these when we finish them. So we could have a button there. I'm sorry, was somebody just speaking? I feel like I just interrupted someone. Okay, so each of these could have a button next to them, or we could just make it so that clicking on them automatically does it. But the main thing we want to make sure of is that when we click on them, that we can make sure that they stay crossed, they get crossed out and stay crossed out after we're done. So how can we keep track of which tasks are completed and which tasks aren't completed? Is our current data structure really up to that task?
No.
No, because each of these items is just text. It doesn't have any information on whether or not it's true or it's done or not. So we may need to refactor this. So I think we still need an array, but what can we replace these simple strings with to make it so that we can keep track of both the task and whether or not it's done?
An object?
Yeah, an object. So we can, yes, we have our new task here. We set new task equal to new form elements 0.value. So maybe we can say instead of list.push new task, we could do push something else instead, like name is new task and completed is false. Something like that. And then since we're changing that, we need to make sure that we are not appending each object. We want to input the text. So I'm going to quickly clear my local storage so that we can try this new data structure. And do learn Python. Okay, so if I check local storage, we have an object that says name is learn Python, completed is false, but it's displaying object instead of the actual text. And so that's because we are, in this case, we have our li.innerText equals list I. But now list I is an object and not a string. So what do we need to do instead?
List I name.
Yeah, I.name. There it is. Learn Python, learn JS. If I check list, I've got an array of objects. Does anyone have any questions about this data structure? Okay. So now we need to make it so that we need to be able to cross off a task by clicking it and save whether it's done in local storage. And to do that, we're going to make sure that first we need to make sure that each of those things in the list has a event listener attached to it so that it can actually react to when we click on it. So as part of my render list thing, I'm just going to do li.addEventListener, click. And for now, all I want to make sure it does is just console.logs hi, just to make sure that we can that's actually working. So every time I click on one of these, it says hi. Okay. But now we need to make sure that this function we're writing actually has access to that data, right? How can we add access to that data? We have an anonymous function here, and we have our access to list and in the middle of this iteration. So how can we pass it from list to this function? Can we just pass it in as an argument? Let's try it. So I'm going to say list I is going to be given as an argument. I don't know why it's giving me this error there. I'm going to say console.log list I. Let's see if that works. Malformed arrow function parameter list. Okay, why is it?
Do you have to have the parentheses around click and list sign?
I thought I did. Yeah, these parentheses should be matching.
Oh, are they arguments though? Click and
So, well, I have a way of getting around this. Instead of doing an anonymous function, we can just do a named function. We can call this cross off and say this takes a task as an argument. And for now, I just want to say console.log task. So now if I click on this, so it's not actually giving me the task. Right now, it's just giving me an event. But I could say, okay, cross off takes list I as an argument. So now if I click here, all right, so it's interesting. It console.log these when I loaded the page, not when I'm clicking on them. Does anyone know why? So when you put a function name like this in JavaScript with the parentheses, JavaScript is just immediately going to try to immediately run that. It doesn't care if this is supposed to be a callback function. It just says, hey, you're telling me to run it. I'm going to run it. So what we need to do is we need to wrap this function call inside an anonymous function like so. So by doing this, it'll only run these when we click on it, not when the page loads. Is everyone with me so far on what I'm doing here? Okay, I will take that as a yes. So now we have this cross-off thing that says, all right, we need to change these completeds from falses to trues if they're already false. And we need to make sure that our list gets updated to reflect that. So let's pseudocode this out a bit. So first we need to say if task.completed is false, set completed to true. Then what? Is this going to update? If we change that here, will it update our original list? Yes or no? What do we think? Well,
I say not right now.
Yeah, we can always test it out. So we could say if task.completed, or if not task.completed, task.completed equals true. So now if I refresh, click on this. So if I check my list, let's see what it says. Okay, so it updated it here. That's cool. but did it update it in local storage? No. Okay, so we found out a way we can update the list this way, but we need to still be able to update the back end as well. So we need to be able to save it. So we could just call render list again, right? Because render list already, wait, no, what am I thinking of? So that won't save anything yet, so we still need to save things. So we have this line right here, local storage.set item to do's with json.stringify list. So we could just copy this, put it here. So now if I refresh the page, so completed is false right now. If I click this and then check local storage again, now completed is set to true. So if the task is not completed, we set it to true, and then we set this item we reset the list, we save the list over with this new updated version. And then we need to change it so that particular li is crossed off. So we need to make it so that whenever we render the list, it should cross off all the completed ones, right? So we could put an if statement in here somewhere that says if list I dot completed, then we would say li dot style dot text decoration equals, I believe it's strike through is what it's called. Like so. So if I refresh the page, no, okay, that didn't work. Let me look up text decoration. Line through, not strike through. All right, so now this one is crossed off. But I should make it so when I click on this one, it also gets crossed off without refreshing the page. So what could I do to make sure that it updates everything whenever I cross something off? Could I just call on the render list function again? Something like this. Because render list already handles that logic, right? And we've updated the list, so it should be accurate now. Let's try it out. So I do learn HTML, click on it, and now it's crossed off, refresh the page, it's still there. All right. So I'm not going to get into the CSS for now because we are already going over time a little bit. What questions do you have about script.js and what we did here?
Is there a rule of thumb, like for that one, since it's just like the individual little elements here, like we did the strike property, is it better to do it that way instead of like getting into the CSS?
I'm not sure what you mean. Could you, so is it better
like for something where you're just changing like one little element like that, and instead of like attaching a CSS file and then like getting into classes and like changing classes?
Oh. That would actually be another way of doing it. So we could have two separate classes in styles.css, one for completed items, one for uncompleted items, and then have script.js change the class name instead. So that would be another way of approaching it that would work just as well.
So yeah, that was my long-winded way of saying we did it that way, but I like this one because it's just simpler and it's just one line instead of having to get into the CSS addition.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's one of those things. I think each way would be around the same amount of work. If you were just adding one thing like this text decoration, yeah, then this works fine. If there was multiple styles that you wanted to add for completed items, like if you wanted to make it, like give it a red background and maybe make it so that you can, or other stuff, then maybe a CSS class would work better. Great. Any other questions? Okay. So let's take a 5-minute break. Be back at 11:15, and we'll go over we'll go over HTTP server 1 as fast as we can, and then I'll do a quick introduction to GitHub pages.